Hi, friends. My name's Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People, and I've got a problem called too much disclaimer. And I'm going to overcome it in this attempt at this video by addressing the topic directly, namely, the issue of flags versus actualities. Flags are indicators that something skeevy might be going on. Realities are something skeevy going on. So, what's the difference? Well, the difference between a flag and a reality is whether or not the thing is bad in and of itself or bad contextually. And so we had this argument this morning, me and Leaf Trimmer on the live stream about Richard Dawson. I was saying he was a fundamentally good person who engaged in a behavior that now looks very skeevy from our current perspective, but that was just false flags. So here's the deal. Richard Dawson, I made a video about him because when I looked into the matter, I was actually just curious, like, why did he kiss everybody on the Family Feud? That seems so weird, you know? um, and he kissed every woman and some of the men and Muppets and stuff that came onto the show. Okay? Uh, and he also kissed some children, you know? Like, and so the thing is this. My point is, we're talking about things that are contextually bad. When I had Delilah, she was little, and, 3 years old or whatever, even 10 years old as much. Maybe not quite that old, but there's a certain period of childhood where, with your own child, you it's perfectly reasonable to peck on the lips, right? Like, that's an acceptable behavior between parent and child. It's very, very common. Um, Most parents do that with their children, at least when they're little. Most parents don't do it when they're children when they're adults, but most children do some of that. Most parents do some of that with their own children when they're little children. It's also broadly understood now that the idea of kissing somebody else's child as a way of greeting is insane. Um, it was probably also understood as that back then too, when Richard Dawson was hosting the Family Feud. But the thing is, it was understood as a branding thing almost, right? At least by him, by Richard Dawson. And the show's producers asked him to stop it, and he said, "Let me ask the audience what they think, or the viewing audience in general." He said, "I'd like everyone to vote in and tell me whether they think I should continue doing that or not." And it was an overwhelming response was in favor of yes, he should continue, because the viewers also viewed it as a branding thing. It's like a jingle in a show or something that it's specific to this show. From modern eyes, it looks very offensive to see a man presuming to initiate uh, a physical greeting that involves that much contact with any person, really. There are some exceptions for women in modern culture, like it's generally considered acceptable for female preschool teachers to initiate a reasonable amount of contact with preschoolers. Uh, and it's required for like young baby care. Like, my ex-wife used to run a preschool, and she had basically a baby room, which is for parents who, after 3 months of the first 3 months of maternity leave or whatever they get, 90 days or something, they go back to work and they need somebody to take care of their baby, right? Well, there's a fair amount of physical contact that's required in that kind of work environment, obviously. So, no, um, in none of the environments is it acceptable for that kissing to happen with tongue. Okay? So we're looking at a difference between something that is uh, the flag of different kinds of things, depending on the context, versus something that is not a flag, but is the actual wrong thing that might be flagged by it. So Leif Schirmer's point was that regardless of anything else, and this is a strong enough point to make, don't get me wrong, that he can cite a specific example of one of the girls uh, who Richard Dawson kissed being visibly uncomfortable and not wanting it, you know, and and I agree that the culture that um, that encouraged and allowed that branding thing itself generally had as a normalized thing uh, a lot more I guess you'd say presumption by men and a lot less agency by women. It was just sort of threaded through the cultural norm. So what I would point out is that a lot of times you've got people who are people who want to put themselves in boxes, you know, which is say, well, let me phrase that. A lot of times you've got ideology testers. We're just going to call them that, ideology testers. People who are ideology testers are those who freak out every time they hear the words identity politics, or those who freak out every time they hear the words gun rights. You know, those are ideology testers. So ideology testers are people who clearly understand what the threat is. It's it's identity politics in the universities that's the threat. Or I clearly know what the threat is. It's the dominant elite in them, yeah. Or I clearly know what the threat is. It's corporations and their greed and their, yeah. Those are all ideology testers, right? Those are people who are thinking like children. So the thing is, unfortunately, it's the vast majority of the population that makes noise about the subject anyway, right? So those voices that are adults don't typically speak as vociferously or passionately because it's easier to passionately experience anger and blame than it is to passionately experience a genuine adult patriotism. Now, this applies to this question here in the following sense. I've noticed a correlation between fairly strong between the following two realities, namely that individuals who are who chooses their scapegoat, right? The person to blame, and some as one of their people to blame as Hollywood, right? That those same individuals will typically also shit on identity politics. It's another one of their people to blame. Of course, note that neither Hollywood, nor identity politics, nor corporations, nor corporate greed, nor dominant elite, none of those things are actually things you can blame. It's a category error. In other words, blaming I'm blaming communism for stubbing my toe. It's a category error, right? Even if the thing I tripped over was poorly made because of I'm in a communist country where it's shittily made and that's why I tripped and stubbed my toe. For me to say, fuck off communism is a colorful metaphor and stuff. But communism is not to blame for that. I'm to blame because I have the onus of responsibility for not stubbing my own toe and watching where I'm going. Now, I might say the shittiness of this construction is somebody's responsible for that. But again, it's a person we've got to talk about, or people, an organization, a specific organization, perhaps. Like, this company screwed me over is a small leap, right? technically the company didn't screw you over. It was um, individuals possibly applying company policy. But because a corporation is in fact a group acting as a single unit, it makes much more sense to reify, to make a reification fallacy about a corporation than it does anything else. A specific corporation, not corporations in general. Okay, because after all, a corporation is a fictitious entity that acts as an agent does. So to treat it as an agent in accusing it and saying like this corporation it has bad business practices is the best way to say it. This corporation operates under a bad frame of reference is a good way to say it. But saying like this corporation is evil is not nearly as much of a leap. This specific corporation is evil as, in fact, it's a categorically different kind of leap than corporations in general are evil. So now let me link back to this thing here. So it is true that the normalization of diminishing individuals' agency because of ontological considerations, namely that because they're a woman, they are presumed to have less say over their own body and being, that is a terrible thing. Every manifestation of that is equally terrible. To reduce an individual to a member to something of their ontology rather than their words or actions. You need to judge people by their words and actions. So now this brings us back to the question of Richard Dawson. Leaf Trimmer could fairly say you're judging him, saying he's a good guy, that he didn't, that he's not bad, but I have pointed to actions, him kissing all these girls that are bad. Well, I'm saying those aren't really actions per se, in the sense that they're not the thing you're worried about. You're not really worried about Richard Dawson kissing an 85-year-old lady on the lips who is so excited to get to kiss Richard Dawson, as at least half the contestants were. Because since that was part of the branding, that was part of the whole experience, right? It seems crazy in retrospect, but it was. It is correct to say that Richard Dawson gave us lots of reasons to wonder if maybe he was a shitty individual. In other words, there's lots of flags there, right? However, it is incorrect to say that those flags comprise the same thing as actual. Okay. Mom's vaccine records need to be picked up by, or they will mail them.
Okay.
And you need to call them and tell them what you want.
Okay, thank you.
What was I saying? All right. So the point is, the one thing that Leaf Trimmer is trying to point at as uncontextually bad, namely that this one girl is made very uncomfortable by it, is an example of Richard Dawson failing to recognize the need to not apply that branding mechanism in this instance. Okay, and you are correct to condemn him for having data that conveys to him that somebody's being made very uncomfortable and ignoring it, if that's in fact what happened. But to generalize from that he's a shitty person is to, again, mistake flags for the actual things themselves. If you actually look into the man's life, he wasn't a womanizer at all. He was really devoted to his first wife, who left him, making very, flimsy accusations, like he threatened to keep me locked in the house or something. Like he never actually he said he might. It's like that kind of stuff. Anyway, he was heartbroken when she left. She wanted to go out and play the field and stuff. And she was very wild. And he was heartbroken. But he always said, "I'm so grateful that you left the kids with me." She left me with the kids because he wanted custody. He wanted to raise his boys, and he spent the next till they were adults basically just being a single father, raising his kids and loving them a lot. And then finally he met his second wife on the show, and he was one of those ladies he kissed. The thing is, understanding the difference between things that are contextually bad and things that are absolutely bad is critically important to thinking well. Not conflating the two, right? Understanding the extent to which we're reifying the thing we're talking about as well, as I mentioned in the earlier bit, is also very important. So some things are more metaphor than others. When we say that well, I'm just going to leave it at that because I got to go to the dentist now. Thanks for watching. That's my thoughts.